There's a girl who's been going to the same school as I have for years, and for the longest time. She's been trying to make my life miserable.
Making
It
everyone's
took
life
me a
miserable.
long time to build up the confidence to stand up to her, and you know what? She still says nasty things to me and everybody else, but it doesn't matter so much anymore because I've taught myself to not care about anything she says. Those girls say all those nasty things to you just to try to upset you, none of it is true, and how could it be if they don't even know you? Both Amy and Chat Noir listened to her inspirational lecture with rapt attention. In fact, they were wearing almost identical expressions of awe. It made her blush a little. So, think you'll be okay. Ladybug stood up and held out a hand to Amy. It's okay to be upset, or mad, or disgusted. And it's okay to cry if you need to. Just don't let them make you feel down on yourself. Amy smiled tremulously at her and took her hand, letting her pull her to her feet. Chat Noir stood up as well. Ladybug noticed that he was glancing between her and Amy with an uncharacteristically distant expression, like he was lost in thought. Thank you, Ladybug. Chat Noir, Amy said. I'm gonna try really hard to not let them get to me so much anymore. I think it'll be easier, now, because you've been so supportive of me. I'm glad. Now let's get you back to solid ground. By the time Amy had been sent on her way home, she assured them it wasn't a long walk both. Ladybug and Chat Noir had less than 2 minutes left. We gotta split and feed our kwamis. Ladybug exclaimed, starting to panic. I'll meet you, on the Arc de Triomphe, okay. Okay, see you soon. Chat Noir replied hurriedly in one breath. He scampered away in the opposite direction as she headed straight for the old familiar sanctuary of the girls' bathroom. Her transformation dissolved just as she flung herself through the door. No one else was in there. Thank God, but still, she couldn't just count on being lucky when it came to protecting her identity. Tiki was quick to remind of this, of course. That was way too close. She squeaked softly, sitting up in Marinette's cupped hands and looking tired and frazzled. Marinette, if anyone had been in here. I know, I'm sorry. Marinette whined, wincing. Oh, I hope Chat Noir got to a safe hiding place. In time. You can make sure he's okay as soon as I've gotten my strength back, Tiki said, trying to sound reassuring as Marinette deposited the little Kwame into her purse. I'll try to eat this cookie. Quickly. Tilda. Adrian sat hunched up and curled into a ball with his arms around his knees as Plag savored his cheese with what seemed to Adrian to be as much noise as possible. He silently vowed to never hide behind a dumpster again except as a last resort. Even with the lid down, the odor of rotten food and various other disgusting substances still managed to waft its way to Adrian's nose, and the stench of camembert right next to him made it 3 times worse. Had he always had such a sensitive nose, or was his heat giving him an enhanced sense of smell as Adrian as well as Chat Noir? Do I have the feline sense of smell as Adrian as well as Chat Noir? Adrian asked aloud, addressing Plag. Or is this just a really smelly dumpster? You've kinda always had a better than average sense of smell, Plag replied with his mouth full. Nobody else seems to notice you smelling like camembert. That's because most people are too polite to tell me I stink to my face, probably, Adrian grumbled. Well, even with just your human sense of smell, certain scents will stick out to you more, Plag continued, ignoring Adrian's complaining. As Chat Noir, you smell everything better than you used to, but a certain few smells a lot better than usual. As Adrian, you'll smell everything the same as you always have, but if you smell those certain smells, your heat and hormone addled brain will still go, woot. Ladybug alert. Adrian instantly honed in on Plag's emphasis on the phrase, certain smells, which set off the alarm bells in his head. And, by certain smells, you're referring to? He asked tensely. Plag swallowed the last of his cheese before replying, which filled Adrian with a now very familiar sense of dread. Basically any and all scents that ladybug gives off, Flag finally said offhandedly. But particularly skin, sweat, and arousal. Arousal has a smell. Adrian asked curiously but nervously, his eyes bugging out. Flag leered at him sideways and smiled. It was an expression that filled Adrian with terror, just a little bit. Well, of course, he crooned slyly. As a female, she gets wet when she's aroused, and it has a smell, doesn't it? Adrian instantly turned cherry red and emitted a low whine, hiding his face in his arms. Flag snickered. Why do you do this to me? Adrian groaned. That doesn't make this any easier for me to endure, and I thought you trying to help me, so that I don't have to suffer so much. Sexual fantasies are completely harmless, Flag replied carelessly. And it's not like you won't have plenty of them without me giving you food for thought. Exactly. Adrian explained indignantly. I don't need you pushing me down the gutter when I can slide down all by myself. Hey, you asked about your sense of smell, I just answered your questions, Flag replied with a pompous sniff. This way, when the smell of ladybug's arousal hits your nose like a storm wind, you won't be caught totally off guard. Adrian had no comeback to this, and in any case, he was preoccupied with kink-shaming himself for trying to imagine this scent that, with no previous sexual experience, he had never been acquainted with. After giving himself a mental slap on both cheeks, he looked up at Flag again. Well, you're finished eating, right? It's time to transform again, so I can meet Ladybug. Okay, have fun. Flag replied, smirking. Ah. Flag, transform me. He squeezed himself out from behind the dumpster and used his staff to propel himself towards the roof. He set off at a brisk pace, leaping gracefully from roof to roof, occasionally running on all fours where there were longer stretches of flat rooftop. He hoped Ladybug hadn't run into any trouble while looking for a place to transform. They had both cut it pretty close. The Arc de Triomphe, situated as it was in the intersection of 5 big streets, seemed to him like not the best place to meet away from prying eyes. He suspected it was simply the first landmark that popped into her head, and he chuckled at the thought of the always cool and collected Ladybug mentally floundering. It never failed to thrill him just a little bit every time he saw a new side of her personality, no matter how insignificant. Like the fact Ladybug had a bully in her life, and had for many years, it was difficult to imagine Ladybug having a hard time dealing with a bully ever, since she always seemed so confident and self-assured to him, until he remembered the day he had met her, when she had blamed herself for allowing Stoneheart and his army of stone men to run amok because she had failed to capture his Akuma the first time. She had been so discouraged, until he had reassured her, reminding her that she had saved Chloe's life, and that they were the only ones who could save Paris. Then, Hawk Moth had announced himself, and demanded the surrender of their miraculouses, Dot and Ladybug, and strode right up to him and thrown his threats in his face. In that moment, she had been nothing short of glorious, and she had stolen his heart without even trying. Does she have any idea of how beautiful and incredible she is to me? He wondered, smiling to himself wistfully. Are there even words good enough to express that to her? Ah, I doubt it. As he approached the Arc de Triomphe, he could see Ladybug was waiting for him from the tiny red figure standing on top of it. As he started scaling the side of it, his heart started pounding in anticipation. When he reached the top, he was met with the sight of her face closer than he expected as she bent over at the waist to catch his gaze. Hey, Chat Noir, she greeted, sounding unusually shy. I realized as I was heading over here that this actually isn't a very good place to have a private conversation, so I was thinking the same thing. He said good-humoredly. You wanna lead the way to a better spot? Sure. She stood and threw her yo-yo, and then swung down and over the streets and cars, converging around the great monument. Chat Noir took out his staff again, and followed One of the most convenient things about the architecture of Paris was that all the traditional styled roofs had multiple levels and a lot of features sticking up that provided plenty of places to hide from people like Aaliyah who might try to follow and spy on them. The spot Ladybug lead them to was one of many Chat Noir was also familiar with, and the feeling of increased privacy was comforting, but it also made his heart go pitter-patter, knowing that they could do almost anything they wanted to hear without anyone knowing, as long as they weren't too loud. Odd train of thought. Don't go there, he thought. Luckily, Ladybug distracted him as she leaned her back against a jutting section of roof. He immediately took notice of her fidgeting posture, downturned gaze, and stiff shoulders. He stood across from her and adopted a similar pose in an attempt to look relaxed. When she finally looked up at him, they opened their mouths at the same time. So, they both cut themselves off and glanced away with nervous chuckles. Sorry. Go ahead. Ladybug urged him. No, no, you first. He urged back. No, it's fine. What's up? She said, grinning. Chat Noir laughed. They both sounded ridiculous. No, I insist, he said, gesturing her way. Hearing what you have to say first will help me figure out how I want to say my part, he added. Oh. Well, in that case. She smiled bashfully and fidgeted. She was acting so nervous, he wondered briefly if he should be worried. But, somehow, he was getting the feeling from her demeanor that whatever she had to tell him wasn't bad news, just something she was feeling awkward about, for whatever reason. Oh wait, I know, he thought. It's because of that thing Plag told me about, where we would get really good at reading each other. I bet that's also why the fight with Black Rose Fairy went so well. I wonder if Ladybug's Kwame has told her about that yet. Ladybug finally spoke, which broke his train of thought and caught his attention. So, she began, shifting her weight from foot to foot and tracing the ground with her toe. I've been thinking. He could see she was trying to smile, and this further reassured him that whatever she was trying to tell him wasn't going to anything he needed to worry about, when her ambiguous phrasing and hesitation might suggest otherwise. He smiled back at her reassuringly and gave her a patient nod of encouragement. About, she seemed to pause to search for the right words, then sighed and blushed. Now he was really curious. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. She finally half yelled at him. And, because I really liked kissing you, and I realized I didn't want things to just end there. I knew I was going to want to kiss you again, and maybe more. And yes, I considered the possibility that this was mostly just the mating cycle drawing me to you, but she paused, glancing nervously and bashfully all over the place as she considered what to say next. The break didn't do much for Chat Noir. He felt like his head was spinning from the sudden onslaught of information that was also making his heart bounce off the walls of his chest like a cat on catnip at 3 in the morning. Oh, and he was blushing, too. But, the truth is, I think I started feeling new things for you a little while before we both went into heat, and, if it really was just the mating cycle making me, think about you and things and whatever. No, please, feel free to list what those things were that you thought about me, he thought. Distantly, still staring starstruck at her. Then I would just be, thinking with my head in the gutter all the time, and wanting things. Oh, really? What things might those be, my lady? Perhaps I can be of service. But that isn't all I think about. She finally managed to look at him and hold his gaze. I think about you, and I wonder about things about you, like, she lost her nerve and dropped her gaze. Again shyly. Like, what you're like in school. Are you the class clown who just tries to get everybody to laugh? Do you spend class time passing notes between your buddies, or goofing off on your phone or doodling on paper? Or do you actually pay attention and take notes and study? I wonder if you're in any extracurricular activities, and what you do for fun in your spare time. I wonder what you like to wear day to day, what your favorite color is, what you. She cut herself off as she no doubt noticed his current expression. He realized belatedly that he was starting to feel a lump forming in his throat and quite possibly tears starting to form in his eyes. She actually wants to know me better, he thought, his heart now swelling with affection for her. She's always made it so hard to tell whether she wanted to keep our partnership strictly professional, or if she just felt like we had to in order to protect our identities. Does this mean she actually wishes we could tell each other who we are? Quote. Chat Noir. Ladybug stepped closer to him, staring up at him with some concern, but mostly wonder. She was close enough for him to catch a hint of her scent on the air, delicate, warm, sweet, and many other things that he didn't have words for. I love this girl so much. He glanced down and hesitantly took her hands in his. She didn't take them away, and he gave them a gentle squeeze. I never knew whether or not you ever thought of me as anything other than your partner, he said softly. Now I'm hearing my lady might actually want to get to know me more, as a friend, or something more. He hoped he didn't sound presumptuous with that afterthought. Ladybug didn't react as if he did. At least. Instead, she lurched forward and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. Chat Noir froze in surprise. What was even happening? Yes, she said softly, squeezing him. Something more. Don't ask me what to call it, because I don't know. I just know that, last week, I was terrified of how the mating cycle might affect me, but now, I'm not afraid of it anymore. I want to see where this goes. Chat Noir felt like he had been struck by lightning. He blinked, then looked down at the top of Ladybug's head. Her scent wafted all around him, and he impulsively buried his nose in her hair and just breathed her in, wrapping his arms around her to complete their embrace. You're saying, he murmured into her hair, you feel something more than friendship. For me. There was a pause, as she seemed to take her time absorbing his question and trying to figure out her feelings. Then, he felt a shiver go up her spine and heard her let out a breath of air. She smooshed her face into his sternum and squeezed him even tighter. Then, he thought he heard her sniffle, and he almost panicked. Yes, she whispered. She did sound close to tears. What was happening? I think I'm falling in love with you, you silly cat. All of the air in his lungs was knocked right out of him by her words, and again he felt the tears coming on again. He squeezed his eyes shut against them as his face was split into a watery smile. And he nuzzled his nose and lips into her hair. Am I dreaming? He wondered. Or is this really happening right now? Oh, God, if this is a dream. Please don't wake up yet. And if this is real. He felt his purse start up. Why you do? I mean, why you are. He croaked. She giggled, and the sound made his heart do a happy wiggle. Then, she looked up at him, dislodging his face from her hair. He could see her eyes shimmering with emotion, and her smile was blinding. She reached up and affectionately scratched him behind the ears, his real ears, not the cat ears. This sent delightful little shivers all across his scalp and down his spine, and before he knew it, he found himself trying to nuzzle against her hand. She kept her fingers buried in his hair, and so he took her hand in his and pressed a kiss against her palm. He heard a tiny, soft gasp. Opening his eyes, he saw her gazing up at him in wonder. He smiled at her. You make this cat the happiest in Paris, my lady, he said warmly, his voice slightly distorted by purring. She smiled back. You make me happy, too, mon minu, she said, blushing. She dropped her gaze bashfully. For a moment, then seemed to suddenly remember something, and looked up at him again. Oh. I forgot. You had something you wanted to talk about, too, right? Oh, yeah? He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and cleared his throat against the fur. Induced tickle there. He let her take her hand back. So, I was actually going to ask you, what kind of approach you wanted to take with the mating cycle, but you've kind of answered the question already, at least, part of it. Ladybug thought for a moment, then pouted. Well, obviously spending more time together than we need to still isn't the best idea, since that'll make us get worse more quickly, but, well, we've seen how good at that we've been so far. I don't think I can suddenly whip myself back into good behavior, and I don't really want you to feel like you have to either. Why, Buganet? He said, grinning at her and raising his eyebrows. Are you saying you want to be able to mess around a little bit? Ladybug's face turned the same color as her suit. Wah. You. She looked away and puffed out her cheeks in the most adorable pout he had ever seen. That's not the phrasing I would use, but you're not wrong, I guess. Woo. He crowed. He leaned forward and grinned at her and gave her the wiggle waggle eyebrow dance. I must say, I'm very much looking forward to getting acquainted with this side of you, Buganet. Her shoulders rose up on either side of her head, but she held his gaze. Well, I'm interested to see how you handle it, Tilda. She smiled innocently. Oh my god, I'm still falling. This, right here, is the woman of my dreams, without a doubt. But for now, she turned slightly more serious. Let's just play it by ear, since we'll only see each other when a supervillain appears, anyway. We still won't go on any patrols, to make sure we don't run into each other, and no unnecessary calls on our gadgets. Otherwise, she trailed off. Suggestively. How about I just follow your lead, and you take things wherever you want, okay? He suggested, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. And if at any point you want me to be the more responsible of the two of us, I'll make sure you don't get as carried away where you don't us. 2. Can you do that, though? She wondered aloud, shifting side to side uncertainly. It's not that I don't trust you, I just, well, if it got bad enough, maybe no amount of self-control will be enough. I hope that's not the case, but if it's for you, for us, I can do anything, he said, putting a hand over his heart. And hey, it won't just be me. We'll support each other, and play it by ear like you said. After a moment, she smiled and nodded. Okay, she said softly. One day at a time. She glanced down at the ground and started fidgeting again. Was there something else she wanted to say? We should probably go our separate ways right about now, she hedged. But, he echoed hopefully before he could stop himself. She pressed her lips together for a moment and looked up at him again. Then, she took a half step closer to him and very delicately took hold of his arms just above the elbows. His heart instantly starting beating triple time, and a soft gasp escaped him. Before I go, may I kiss you again? He shivered at the sound of her murmur, and his heart seemed to slam itself against the front wall of his rib cage. So many variations of hell yes popped up for consideration in his mind that he failed to settle on any of them. Instead, he put his arms around her and gently pulled her close. Without a word, leaning forward just enough to bring his face down to her level. He was not prepared for the enthusiasm of Ladybug's response, which was to stand on tiptoe and fling her arms around his neck as she pressed her lips hungrily against his. He wrapped his arms around her waist and scooped her up against him so he could feel the soft warmth of her body pressed flush against his. She hummed in pleasure, and then as their lips softly detached from each other, twin gasps of air escaped them, and he felt her warm breath against his open lips before Ladybug was kissing him again. And again. He kissed her back insistently, desperately, he just couldn't get enough of her. And from the way she tilted her head up to meet him so eagerly every time, hugging herself tightly against him and panting in between kisses, he knew she couldn't get enough of him. He was floating on clouds and sinking into the ocean at the same time, his brain gone foggy and his heart fluttering like a bird. Kissing came so effortlessly now, no longer shy and awkward but certain and passionate, like a dance between them. Determined to not be the first one to pull back for air, he struggled to keep breathing through his nose. The sweet fragrance of her skin flooded his nose, and he longed to bury his face into every dip, nook, and valley of her body to fill his lungs with her, and then rub and nuzzle every hill and curve of her, lapping at her skin with his tongue, until she smelled like him, like his. The volume of his purr had just about doubled, and he could feel the vibration of it in his lips and tongue, which meant that Ladybug could almost certainly feel it as they kissed. He suddenly nosed his way under her chin and started nuzzling her neck, tracing his nose in aimless little swirls under her jawline and sprinkling teeny tiny kisses all over. He felt her bury her fingers in his hair, and her breathing came in shallow, uneven little gasps. She made a little sound that was like a cross between a hum of pleasure and a giggle of delight. It made his heart sink to hear her relish his feline displays of affection, and he sighed dreamily before stealing a taste of her skin where it was exposed just above the neck of her suit. Oh, God, if desire had a taste, it was this. He let out a low whine. Ah, he wanted. He opened his mouth wider and dragged his teeth against her skin, almost panting against her neck at this point. When she gasped in surprise, however, it was loud and sudden enough to snap him out of his trance, and he jerked his head back like he had been stung on the nose by a bee. She stared wide-eyed at him as he blinked rapidly and struggled to catch his breath. He gave his head a little shake in an attempt to clear it, but his nose was still filled with the smell of her. Sorry, he swallowed heavily. I guess, the tomcat and me got carried away. Ladybug blinked and seemed to come out of a daze of her own. Oh. Don't worry, it's okay. She smiled bashfully, blushing pinker than a watermelon. You didn't hurt me or make me feel uncomfortable, or anything. She inclined her head to stare him in the eyes mischievously. I'm guessing that was the love biting you were talking about that one time. Somehow, he felt his face heat up even more, and his eyes bugged out. Then he slapped a palm to his face. Oh my God. He groaned. I didn't even. I'm a devolving mess. Ladybug giggled, and he took his hand away from his face to look at her in surprise. Really, I don't mind, she said, grinning. I mean, she glanced around shyly. It would defeat the purpose if your feline tendencies scared me off, right? They're part of the mating cycle. Because they're supposed to help you, win me over, right? I guess you've got a point, he said, mulling it over. Wait, he fixed her with what he hoped was a seductively mischievous gaze and grinned. Are you saying it's working? Her hot pink blush and deer in the headlights expression said it all, and so, of course, all he could do was beam at her with unrestrained glee. You do have a soft spot for kitty cats, he gushed, squishing her cheeks between his hands. All this time, I just had to give in to my instincts. Oh no, you've discovered my secret fetish for cat boys, she drawled. Whatever shall I do? I mean, if I got what you want, and you want what I got. Ooh, careful with your choice of words, chat on. She teased, booping his nose with a finger. He let go of her face and chuckled. If I'm being honestly serious, though, she added, I should probably get going. She took a step back away from him with obvious reluctance. Before we lose track of time again. Afraid you won't be able to keep your hands off me, he teased. Afraid we won't be able to keep our hands off each other, she corrected softly, fixing him in What he swore was the closest thing to bedroom eyes he had ever seen on any human in person. Yeah, that, LL helped me keep my hands of you, definitely. He thought sarcastically, hoping that his still lingering arousal wasn't, prominently visible. Yeah. You're right, of course. He managed to say, smiling sheepishly. I guess I'll see you around. Ladybug chuckled, turning to leave. Yeah, see you around, she said softly. Oh, wait. Before you go, one more thing. Ladybug paused, looking at him curiously and turning to face him again. Just to satisfy your earlier curiosity a little bit, he scratched the back of his head awkwardly, and then folded his hands behind his head in an attempt to look at ease, but when he spoke, the soft warmth in his voice was somewhat at odds with his casual posture. My favorite color is blue. I really like playing video games and watching anime online, and I'm actually a very diligent student, though I have been known to pass notes and have whispered exchanges with my friend who sits next to me. I apologize if I've ruined any bad boy fantasies you may have had of me, he added jokingly. Ladybug giggled. You've done a lot of punning and posing and showing off over the year that I've known you, but I never got the impression that you were a bad boy. And it's a good thing you never tried that particular approach, because bad boys are not my type. I didn't think they were, but it's great to hear, he replied with laugh. She gazed at him in silent wonder for a moment, taking in the little jewels of information he had just gifted her and smiling, every bit as happy as he hoped she would be to learn just a little bit more about him. Thanks, Chat Noir, she said. She took a deep breath. Quote dot dot dot. My favorite color is pink, she said. I always try to do my best in school, so I'm a pretty good student, but I shine best when I get to use my creativity. I'm really into arts and crafts, I guess you could say. Dot and I really like video games, too. She turned around and took out her yo-yo. See you soon. And off she went. Chat Noir held a hand to his chest. This girl's gonna be the death of me, he thought dreamily, a gooey smile spreading across his face. Either by kissing the breath out of me, or because she's drop dead gorgeous. Hey, I crack myself up. He took out his stick and turned and set off for home. Oh, man, I hope nobody at home missed me, he thought, finally realizing he really had no idea how long he had been out here with Ladybug. He stopped to check the time on his stick. Okay, I should make it back in time for dinner with plenty of time to spare. Tilda. After climbing through his bedroom window, well, the one of many windows in a row that he preferred to use to come in and out of, and shedding his magical catsuit, he quickly checked his room phone and cell phone for any messages. He saw Natalie had tried calling him 3 times and left him a text, demanding that he let her know where he was so that she knew he was safe and where to pick him up. He felt bad for her, he couldn't tell her that he kept running off to turn into a superhero, and so it almost definitely worried her sick every time. And then, even when he turned up fine afterward every time, she and the gorilla would suffer his father's wrath at least as much as he did, when it wasn't their fault at all. Nino had blown up his phone with 2 voicemails and several texts asking if he was okay after the Black Rose overgrowth. He shot Nino a reply saying he was fine, and that he was late replying because Natalie and his father had gotten all over his case for going missing in all of the chaos. It was close enough to the truth if the chronology of events was ignored, because he was willing to bet that Natalie would be lecturing him big time the next time he saw her. Actually, how long had it been since he had gone AWOL? It had been maybe a quarter after noon when the Black Roses had ensnared the car during his ride home, and it was about 2:30 now, so, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Yikes, he was gonna be in trouble. Well, at least his troublesome boner was finally gone. Tilda. Marinette was hyper-conscious of the lingering wetness of her arousal all the way home. She Hoped she wouldn't leave a damp spot in her suit, because then, would it stick to Tiki? Tiki probably wouldn't hold it against her, but that didn't make it any less embarrassing. When she finally released her transformation, however, Tiki made no comment about it, and so Marinette inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. Tiki did, however, get right up in Marinette's too. Take a good look at her still blushing face. Oh, my, she tittered. You and Chat Noir went at it again, didn't you? Did you tell him what you wanted to say? Marinette smiled shyly and scratched her cheek with a finger. Yeah. I did. She flopped backward onto her back and yanked her pillow from overhead to hug over her chest. And, it made him really happy, so happy, it was so sweet. He wanted to ask me about how I wanted to handle the mating cycle, too, so he decided he was going to take cues from me, but that I could ask him to help me resist temptation if I wanted to anytime. And yeah, we obviously got caught up in making out for a while. She crossed her legs and squeezed her thighs together against the throbbing of arousal, her memory flashing back to passionate embrace. She squirmed restlessly, and briefly wondered how long it had been since she hadn't been blushing. It was starting to feel like a chronic condition. She hadn't intended to confess to Chat Noir that she was in love with him, she hadn't known that until he had wrapped his arms around her and nuzzled his nose and lips into her hair and you feel something more than friendship. For me. His soft murmur had been filled with wonder and hope. And somehow, hearing just how much he longed for her heart in exchange for his suddenly made her own feelings crystal clear. Yes. I love you. It had sprung to her mind instantly, unbidden, and the truth of it had left her breathless, brought tears to her eyes. She took a leap of faith and let him hear those words that he had been longing to hear for so long. Why you do. I mean, why you are. The tremble in his voice told her she had given him the greatest gift he had ever wished for, and the emotion in his eyes warmed her heart like nothing ever had before. When she had scratched him behind the ears, he had instantly nuzzled against her hand with the enthusiasm of a cat for his beloved mistress, and then he had taken her hand and kissed it like a knight swearing fealty to his lady, taking her breath away. It made her wonder again why it had taken her so long to realize how loving he was. I can't believe I used to try so hard not to humor him too much, she thought. I wanted to make sure I didn't overinflate his ego, but he just melts under the smallest doses of affection. It's so adorable and makes me feel almost giddy. It's kind of addicting to spoil Chat Noir, as if he were a real cat. I wonder if he feels something similar when he can tell I like how he kisses me. She hadn't forgotten her earlier desire to read the entry in her diary about Chat Noir's confession. But now she had much more potent fodder for her sexual fantasies, and she couldn't stand to wait any longer for sweet release. I gotta rub one out, Tiki, she whined. Gimme 20 minutes. Oh, take as much time as you need, Marinette, Tiki said sweetly before zooming out of sight. I can't help keep your parents from accidentally interrupting you, though. Oh, crap, my parents. She groaned. They don't know why I never came home for lunch. She dug her phone out of her purse and called her home phone number. Hi, Mom. She squeaked nervously when her mother picked up. Sorry I didn't call you sooner. It was just so crazy out here with the roses everywhere, but I'm fine. I just went back inside the school building and waited with everyone else until they all disappeared. Classes are dismissed for the rest of the day, so I'll be home soon, okay? Bye. Marinette hung up before her mother could get in a word edgewise, and put her phone aside. She quickly unbuttoned and unzipped her jeans and shoved them along with her panties as far down her legs as she could before impatiently kicking them off. She let out a shaky breath as she spread her legs, exposing her damp sex to the open air, foregoing any sort of preliminary teasing. She dipped 2 fingers into her folds and swirled them lazily around to lubricate her fingertips. Then she brought them straight to her clit, using 2 fingers on her other hand to lift her clitoral hood as she started tracing gentle circles, forcing herself to keep the volume of her voice confined to breathing and gasping only while she good. At least she retrieved the deliciously vivid memories of being intertwined with Chat Noir, and pouring every ounce of her desire into kissing him, as he pulled her flush against him and kissed her back like her loved her, truly, deeply, madly loved her. It had felt like her body was glowing with heat and humming with electricity at the same time, as her heart pounded frantically in her chest and her core throbbed with arousal. She had tried as hard as her love-drunk brain allowed her to keep quiet, but it had been so hard not to moan with pleasure and whine with need, especially when he had started love biting her almost exactly like she had fantasized about him doing. His claws had sent delicious shivers up her spine as he restlessly clawed at her, purring like a motor boat the whole time. Ah, it was addicting, the thrilling rush. She felt to have him so willingly vulnerable to her and so eager to shower her in his affection. Who didn't dream about having a lover so sincere and so devoted to his partner? A lover. Oh, God, he would worship me, wouldn't he? She thought. She was panting rapidly, swirling her fingers as fast as she could over her clit as her hips subtly rocked back and forth as she neared climax. Even though he's probably no more sexually experienced than I am, if we actually had sex. It was so easy to imagine Chat Noir's body pressed against hers, because it had just happened. And it was so easy to imagine him panting next to her ear, because he already had. She just had to add the imagined sensation of his skin sliding against hers, his hips thrusting against hers, his. She stifled a whine as she came, her inner muscles spasming as she continued to rub feverish circles against her clit. She refused to let up, forcing her body to continue flooding her with aftershocks. She squirmed and whimpered as she milked herself for every ounce of ecstasy she could, not caring that she tended to squirt slightly whenever she did this. She didn't stop even when she felt the tiny squirt of warm juice hit her hand, not until her legs were shaking and she wasn't willing to risk getting any louder. She struggled to catch her breath, feeling much better physically, but emotionally, she was feeling a little greedy. She wanted to keep exploring this daring new fantasy, and she wanted to keep masturbating while she did. This seemed like the perfect occasion for a G-spot orgasm to her, but she had to able to give herself one successfully. She knew, of course, that every woman was different, and not all G-spot orgasms were created equal, but it just didn't seem fair that she might not be able to experience them, period. Everything she had read about them made them sound so amazing. But on the occasions she had tried, it had just felt strange, like she needed to pee, and it was too uncomfortable to insert more than just one finger in there. But if that was all that she could manage, how the hell was she supposed to enjoy sex? Maybe now that she had already come, and quite hard, too, she would be relaxed and wet enough to manage one. It certainly didn't hurt to try. She carefully pushed her middle finger inside herself, and felt around for that rough spot on the upper wall of her core. When she was pretty sure she had found it, she started crooking her finger and rubbing it in the come hither motion that every source she had consulted had recommended. She did her best to ignore the feeling of her bladder being stimulated. Maybe it would go away if she just kept going. Or she would get used to it. Whether it's with Adrian or Chat Noir, I wanna be able to make this work before my first time. Damn it. Is that really too much to ask? It did start to feel less weird after several seconds, but it wasn't exactly setting off fireworks inside her, either. She tried to imagine it was Chat Noir's finger instead of her own, and the image sent a rush of heat through her, but it didn't seem to change how the sensation felt. How is a thrusting cock supposed to feel amazing when I can't make myself feel amazing with my Own finger. She lamented dramatically. Does it really all just come down to clitoral stimulation? She remembered learning from sex ed that very few women were able to orgasm during intercourse without it, but that was just because it took practice, right? If it wasn't possible to have a G-spot orgasm that way, then what was all the fuss with dildos about? Marinette wasn't comfortable using a household object as a substitute dildo, even if it was hers, so she carefully added her other finger and started slowly and gently pumping her fingers in and out as she stroked. Using two fingers felt odd, but not uncomfortable, so she kept at it, rubbing a little more firmly. Ooh, that's better. It felt different, but good. While stroking her clit sent what felt like sparks emanating from where her fingers touched. This felt more like throbs of heat and pressure. She could keenly feel her face and neck flushing, and it was like her blood was getting warmer and thicker as it pumped through her veins. It felt really good, now. She found herself unable to completely stifle her soft grunts and moans as she started rocking her hips back and forth again with need and anticipation. Her inner walls were spasming slightly around her finger, now, and she could feel the muscles in her legs twitching just a tiny bit. She didn't know what to expect out of the orgasm she hoped to get from this, but she was excited. She held her left hand over her nose and mouth to help muffle herself as she rose higher and higher, and wound tighter and tighter. Her heart was throbbing so hard, it felt like it might pop. It was a little difficult to pinpoint the exact moment she came, because her core had already been spastically and erratically squeezing her finger, but it was a surge of much more of it all. Her inner walls squeezed and kept squeezing, her thighs quivered, and her toes curled as a wave of hot ecstasy rushed through her. She emitted a kind of muffled squeal into the hand she held over her mouth as she felt warm liquid leak out over the fingers of her right hind that she still held inside herself. When she was sure she wasn't going to make any more noise, she took her hand away from her face and started trying to catch her breath. As she slipped her fingers out of herself, the sensation of feeling her inner walls relaxing back together made her shiver and squeeze her thighs together. She rolled over and snatched her pillow into a bear hug, moaning softly.